PWTN. Founded by Dr. Paul and Vincent, preacher, teacher, and prolific author of the popular Persistence Works book series, broadcasting the good news of the gospel of Jesus Christ from El Paso, Texas to the world, and bringing you into God's presence. Experience the difference. You'll never be the same. Don't just watch TV. Watch Persistence Works Television Network, PWTN.
Hello, everybody. God bless you. This is the day the Lord has made. We will rejoice and be glad in it. Hey, I want to welcome you to today's special edition of our special program, Global Politics. Today, we are focusing on Singapore. And well, in case you don't know, I am your host, Bishop Paul Vincent, and you are watching Persistent Works TV Network. We are streaming on 15 different platforms. We are streaming on our Persistent Works TV Network, which streams on Roku, on Fire TV, on Apple TV. We are streaming on our two apps, our Android app, our iPhone app. We are streaming on all the leading social media platforms, on YouTube, on Facebook, on Twitter, on LinkedIn, and everything in between. So wherever you're watching us from, I want to welcome you today. And we are also streaming from around the world. So wherever you're watching from us from around the world, if you're watching us here across in the US, in Europe, in Africa, in Nigeria, in Egypt, if you're watching us in Australia, Malaysia, if you're watching us in Singapore, we'll be talking about Singapore today. Hey, I want to welcome you today, and I believe we are going to have a great time in Jesus' name. So please help me share this video. Let it go viral. I'm trusting God we are going to be reaching people, and you are going to enjoy the broadcast today, because this program, Global Politics, where we focus on different nations, is a program we created here on Persistent Works TV Network, where we talk about different nations and cities and states, and we explore what's going on in those places, and especially things to learn from those countries or things to point to where changes need to be made. And we also get to speak with political leaders. And by the way, if you're a political leader watching this and you want us to talk about or to highlight your city, your country, your state, hey, reach out to us, because one of the things we do here is to invite political leaders as well, whereby we interview them and talk with them about their country, about their city or state, or maybe if you are a governor, if you are a congressman, senator, if you are a president of any nation, and you want us to do a story or to cover your city, your nation, or your administration, what you are doing in government and the progress you've made, your challenges, you can reach out to us. Let us help tell your story, highlight it, and then we'll be glad to do so. But many times, as in today's case, we do research and do a story on countries or cities, especially those that have something to write home about. So today, the reason why we are focusing on Singapore is because Singapore provides one of the best examples for developing nations, especially, and those of us who are originally from a developing country in Africa. We know the challenge most of these countries face, which I zero down to leadership. The basic problem of most developing countries is leadership. The lack of leadership is what has put Africa, including Nigeria, as great as they are. The reason why Nigeria is so backward and has not made much achievement over the years and is plagued with all that is happening is because of poor or bad leadership. They've not been blessed to have a great leader so far. Singapore, what distinguishes Singapore from every other nation? What moves Singapore from being a third-class nation, a third world country, even worse than that? If there was a fourth world, I think you would call it a fourth world nation. Moving from there to a first-class nation that compete with the most civilized of the world. The only thing I would say that made that possible is leadership. They don't have natural resources as many people, many nations, including the ones that we are talking about that are so backward. They don't have natural resources as they have. They don't have land. Many countries are so blessed with so much land and all that. They don't have that. There are a lot of things that is an disadvantage to them. But you see, even in the midst of that, with the right leadership, they managed to create what has become today one of the best countries in the world, one of the cleanest countries in the world, one of the most business-friendly countries of the world. And most people like to visit, businesses like to do business in and through Singapore. And because of that, in my book, Actually, my Facebook, Persistence Works. In case you have not seen my Facebook, this is the cover of my Facebook, Persistence Works, Discovering How to Persist Unto Your Miracle. The forward was written by Bishop Francis Waloke, the current national president of Pentecostal Fellowship of Nigeria. In this book, I shared a story and I encourage people not to give up. The bottom line is that people not give up, but they persist until they see the physical manifestation of their miracles, until they reach their goals, until they achieve their dreams. And in doing that, I explored 40 examples of people, organizations that persisted, many of them from the Bible. And I also explored contemporary figures who, through persistence, through not throwing it in the towel, through not giving up, they were able to achieve greatness, great things for themselves, for their nation, for their organization. One of those I reference in this book because I've always admired. I mean, we all are human. Nobody is perfect. No matter whatever you do or accomplish, there will be flaws. So I'm not focusing on what he didn't do right, but my focus is what he did right and the result that was accomplished. So the leader of Singapore, the prime minister at the time after the independence, Lee Kuan Yew, who was the person that is, I would say, single-handedly responsible for what Singapore has become today. So he was one of those I wrote about in my book, Persistence Works. And by the way, I'm sure you know that Persistence Works is the book Persistence Works is the mother of all things persistence. So this book gave birth to everything Persistence Works that you see happening today. It started as a book. It metamorphosed to book series, which ended up being a 20 published books. Of course, 5 more are coming very soon. So it's going to be a 25, book series. We have an e-newsletter, Persistent Works e-newsletter that we send to over 100,000 people across 150 nations. It also have many other Persistent Works products, including Persistence Works TV network. So if you're wondering how Persistent Works TV network came about, this is the mother of it. This is my Facebook, the mother of Persistence Works products. It has become a brand name, so to speak. And I'm so glad and so thankful to God for the privilege to birth the message of persistence. I believe that's one of the main things that God wants me to bring to the body of Christ, the message of persistence, not giving up until you see the physical manifestation of your miracles, of your dreams, of your goals. So talking about Singapore, one of the leaders, or the key leader, as I said, is the one that I referenced in the book, Lee Kuan Yew, and he was the leader that led Singapore from independence to become what it has become today. Now, there are many things they did or he did as a leader. The most important thing a leader could do is to provide visionary leadership. Part of the problem of most developing countries, especially in Africa, including Nigeria, part of the problem is that they don't have visionary leadership. They only have leaders who are concerned about themselves, about their interests, about their pockets, and all of that. They don't think 50 years, where do we want this country to be 50 years from now, 5 years from now, 15 years from now, 10 years from now? What do we want to accomplish? And not only have it in paper, be willing to make the sacrifices and put in place policies to see it through. They don't have that. In most cases, they end up having it on paper and as policies and no political will to execute it. And that has been the problem all the way. So a nation like Singapore did a couple of things right, which is why, to me, I think it's one of the role models. It's one of the examples developing nations need to look at to be able to see what did they do right? What did they put together? How did they come up with going from third class or even fourth class nation to becoming a first class nation? How do they end up becoming a destination where everybody or every business wants to go to? That is what we are going to be talking about. And I've put together some videos that will help shed more light on this. But before then, I want to just talk about some of the policies that he put in place as a political leader when he was a prime minister. As I said before, the most important thing a leader can provide his people, an organization, nation state, is visionary leadership. Where do you want? You are the governor, you are the president, you are the prime minister, you are the mayor. Okay, that's okay. So what? Where do you want this nation, this city, this state? Where do you want it to be 25 years from now? Do you want to keep doing business as usual and merry-go-rounding round the clock, doing everything, the same thing that everybody has done in the office, like for the past 100 years or 50 years? In most cases, politicians do just that. That is why not every politician is a leader. Most politicians are just that, politicians. They are just concerned about the next election and winning the next vote and telling you all what you want to hear so that you can give them your vote. But leaders are not so concerned about, winning the next election. Leaders are more visionary leadership, which is why I want to stress the word visionary leadership. Visionary leaders are more concerned about where the organization, where the nation, where the city, where the state needs to be 20 years from now, 25 years from now, even 50 years from now. And in that long-term thinking, in that strategic thinking, they're able to make plans, put in place policies that will take you there. You may not get there overnight. You might make some progress. At least maybe you may lay the groundwork, but the next person might continue. But at least you start working towards it. But most of our people are only, most third nation countries are only concerned about just doing whatever it is that works for them now, whatever it is that favors their pockets now. That's more of what they end up doing. But at the end of the day, we are going to explore and discover why is it that Singapore was able to go from a third world country to a first world country. And as I said in the book, I talked about a few things he did. One of the most important things he did in transforming the country was that he was able to prioritize education. He sent people to school. He made education affordable, that everyone was able to, improve themselves. Any nation that don't pay attention to education, I mean, you are not going to go far, at least in the long run. Because when you understand that education empowers your people, education is one of the ways by which you begin to lift your people out of poverty. It's not everything. And education is not only having people like going to become medical doctors, lawyers or so. That also includes creating a trade schools, schools where people can learn craft and handwork and whatever it is that can empower them economically. Not just being in the four walls of the school educational setting to learn things that you end up being jobless for the rest of your life. But when a government prioritizes education, you will begin to see the dividends in years time. But the problem most times is that most leaders in most nations are not visionary enough to see that they need to prioritize education. They need to pay attention, to education. Now, one other thing he did, because considering the fact that Singapore doesn't have raw materials, doesn't have natural resources and all of that, one of the things he did was to promote or to encourage foreign direct investment, to bring industries. And like I said in the book, at that time, he actually brought in over 1,200, US and Japanese companies that really helped to, bring direct investment in the country to set up industries and even manufacturing. And it became a kind of major hub for distribution of manufactured goods. They don't have oil, but they do import crude and process and refine oil and ship. So they're one of the largest exporters of crude oil today. Yet they don't have a natural resource of oil as many. And it's funny, countries like Nigeria have have oil, and yet they import oil. And Singapore doesn't have oil, yet they export oil. Is that not an irony, But it all boils down to leadership. When a nation is blessed with, not just a nation, an organization, a city, when they are blessed with a great leader, you see the result in time. Many of these things might not happen overnight. It might take years, decades. But you see, you measure the result over time by what happens. You measure the impact, what happens over time. So I respect the leadership of Singapore in being able to lead the country from out of poverty, out of where they were way back behind. In fact, they were rejected. Do you know that they were part of Malaysia, but Malaysia literally kicked them out? You know, nations will normally fight to gain independence from the colonial masters, the country that they were part of. Not in case of Singapore. Singapore was the country. Malaysia kind of kicked them out, say, you know what, you are more of a liability than being part of more of an asset. So we don't want it to be part of us. So they involuntarily became independent. And it was in the midst of all of that. The video I put together will help shed more light on this. But you see, the big lesson and takeaway why I'm doing this video, why I'm focusing on this country today, Singapore today, is because I want it to become an inspiration, a challenge, to become something that countries, developing countries, can look to and say, you know what, if Singapore could do this, we can do this. If this can happen in Singapore, we can do this. It begins with the right leader. If you don't have the right leader as a nation, as a city, as a state, then your problem is you have a bigger problem. Your main challenge may be to do whatever you can to elect a visionary leader. And in some part of the world, Africa especially, including Nigeria, it's so unfortunate that the visionary leaders who have credibility and integrity don't end up being in office. They end up having the wrong ones who have nothing to offer. Whatever they have to offer, man, you cannot get into office by corrupt means and expect to fight corruption. You don't even have the moral right to do so. If you try to fight it, hey, the people you are trying to fight will be like, hey, you did even worse to get to office. So what are we talking about? So that is why you cannot fight what you don't. You cannot give what you don't have. If you don't have credibility, you can't give it. If you don't have integrity, you can't give it. You can't give what you don't have. And you can't fight what you are part of. You don't have the moral right, the moral justification to do so. Even if you do it, they will tell you to your face, hey, you don't have the right to do so, because guess what? We also know your track record. We know what you did to get into office before you got into office. So it's important for nations, cities, states to elect and to make sure that leaders who are visionary leaders get into office. That is going to be the starting point of creating the future they want to see. And when that happens, it's so important for leaders to think strategically, to think far, to think 25 years. I always use 25 years as the minimum, but actually think 50 years. Think 25, bring it to 15 to 10, so that whatever you are doing, policies you are putting in place, are things that should outlast you. If as a leader, what you are doing is only policies that favors you and happens when you are in office, you are a failure already, because your policies and what you do as a public officer, as a government official, shouldn't be just for yourself, just for when you are in office. But unfortunately, many leaders, many politicians, I don't call them leaders, many politicians in developing countries, they are only concerned about what happens in their tenure when they are in office. When they leave office, even if the place burns down, they don't care. And they don't care for the people, which is why their emphasis is on what they get and what they and their clique can profit from the system. But visionary leaders think strategically. They think how it benefits the masses, the people, not just about you. So the story of Singapore is an encouraging, challenging, inspiring story, testimony of how a nation can go from being the last to being the first. So I want you to watch this video that we've put together, and I'm going to come back and we'll conclude this. But watch this and be encouraged, be challenged, be inspired, and maybe someday you will plan to visit Singapore. And this year, by the grace of God, I'm going to be in Singapore as well. And maybe someday I may get to even interview one of their government officials, because hey, this broadcast, our goal is to also talk to government officials about, some of what we talk about on this program. So watch this about Singapore and the journey of going from where they were the third world country to becoming a first world country. I'll be back.
Watching Persistence Works Television Network, PWTN.
In 1965, the newly created nation of Malaysia did something that nations almost never do. It voluntarily ejected a strategic and important part of its own land, the 360 square mile island known as Singapore. While independence is usually a cause for celebration, the new leader of Singapore, Lee Kuan Yew, foresaw the coming economic calamity.
You see, the whole of my adult life, I had believed in Malaysian merger.
Singapore was already in a terrible position prior to independence. 2/3 of its million population lived in slums, with many addicted to opium. Its highly mixed population was increasingly breaking out into violence. It had no significant industry, and unemployment was already high. Its newfound independence now meant it was without access to natural resources, as the island has none. Its larger and more powerful neighbors were not only going to cut it off from trade, but were actively hostile to Singapore's existence. To make matters even worse, British military forces were withdrawing from the island, taking with them 20% of the remaining economy. Singapore appeared to be destined for underdevelopment, violence, and poverty. Yet today, Singapore is the 4th richest nation on Earth. Its citizens are among the most educated, healthy, and productive of any country. It has the best infrastructure in the world, it is a leader in high-tech manufacturing, and is the financial and logistical hub of all of Southeast Asia. But how did this unlikely, poor, and tiny Asian island nation go on to become one of the best places to live in the world? How did Singapore become so incredibly rich? In the 19th century, there was a corporation so powerful it brought in more revenue than its host nation, had its own military, and 1/5 of the entire world's population lived on its private lands. That corporation was the British East India Company. It derived its profits from shipping and trading resources from all over the world, and its most lucrative cargo was Chinese tea. To purchase the tea, it would sell massive quantities of opium that it grew in northern India. All of this shipping happened to pass through one narrow corridor known as the Malacca Strait. Quickly, this became the company's most profitable trade route, constituting 50% of its revenue. But in order to protect this route and to make the voyage more feasible, the company desperately wanted their own port in the region. However, a naval superpower already had an iron grip in the region. For the 2 centuries prior, the Dutch had a monopoly on these lands and outpowered anyone who attempted to compete. As such, it was official company policy to not take any actions that might anger the Dutch, out of fear of disrupting the incredibly lucrative existing trade routes. But one tenacious company official named Sir Thomas Raffles took it upon himself to create such a port on the sparsely populated island that would go on to become Singapore. Situated at the tip of the Malayan Peninsula, it was the ultimate location to set up shop. After some back and forth in Europe, the Dutch eventually did nothing to stop the British from having the territory. But Singapore was not to become an ordinary port. In order to attract traders away from the existing ports in the region, Singapore was to become a free port, meaning there were 0 taxes on businesses or port-related activities. This was a massive advantage over the other heavily taxed ports in the region, and word quickly spread. In just 4 years, Singapore had attracted tens of thousands of traders from China, Malaya, and India. Soon the horizon became full of ships as everyone clamored to seek their tax-free riches. But because of its lack of significant administrative oversight, Singapore became a hub for less desirable ventures. Slave trading, gambling, opium dens, violence, and prostitution became commonplace. But booming international trade continued to propel Singapore's importance and popularity. This was supercharged by the opening of the Suez Canal in Egypt. Trading from England to China was now 5,000 less miles, which in turn cut costs and dramatically increased shipping demands. The new route also now favored the Strait of Malacca instead of the Sunda Strait, meaning more traffic was passing by and utilizing the port. Singapore was now by far the most important port in the region, and as such, in 1967, it became an official crown colony of the British Empire. But yet another development would propel its importance further. The introduction of rubber trees in Malaya and booming global demand for tin, which was abundant in the region, meant Singapore was no longer just a stop on the way to China, but the hub for the riches of Southeast Asia. Resources would be extracted from the peninsula and then transported to Singapore, where it would be processed and shipped globally. As Singapore has no natural resources, this fostered a symbiotic economic relationship with Malaya. With its growing importance came greater British military presence. creating industry surrounding its dockyards and providing services to military personnel. By the year 1900, tiny Singapore would be home to more than 200,000 people, who were much better off than those in other nations in the region. But Singapore's centuries of unhindered growth would come to a screeching halt. As the 20th century progressed, Singapore, even being 6,000 miles away from Europe, was not safe from the ensuing global conflicts. During the Second World War, the Japanese Empire was engulfing all lands it came into contact with. In December 1941, the Japanese invasion of Malaya had commenced, and within 2 months, it was at Singapore's doorstep. Despite orders from London, Singapore was officially surrendered on February 15, 1942, and for 3 years, Singapore would undergo unbelievable suffering and destruction. Even as the tides of war changed and liberation came in 1945, the retaking of the island leveled much of the remaining structures. Singapore was no longer a jewel of Southeast Asia, but a smoldering pile of rubble. Devastated from war and neglected from a crippled British Empire, the rebuilding of Singapore was uncoordinated and unregulated. Haphazard slums started to dominate the island, infrastructure was not fully restored, and violence and opium continued to wreck the population. As one travel magazine put it, Singapore was filled with utter filth and poverty. One must see it with his own eyes to believe it. Over the centuries, the British did little to promote or integrate the diverse and densely packed population. There was no Singaporean identity, as each group lived amongst themselves, fought for their own resources, stayed isolated to their own customs, and oftentimes had conflicting interests with the other groups. Now, with terrible living conditions and growing unemployment, these groups started to engage in violence, further worsening Singapore's situation. For most of Singapore's existence, its desire to split from the British Empire was low, as its lack of resources meant it did not experience the exploitation that other colonies faced. When the British Empire was not able or willing to defend it during the war, with its now crippled economy, rising social violence, and with the decolonization of much of the rest of the world, the idea of independence started to propagate among the population. Singaporeans would go on to put their trust in one man to do just that. Lee Kuan Yew, a lawyer who spent his years studying in Britain, formed the People's Action Party, or PAP, and was able to successfully gain a few seats in local elections in 1955. Lee spearheaded the independence movement, prompting London to initially clamp down on the PAP. But with changing British public opinion in favor of decolonization, the process of independence had begun. In 1959, Lee was elected as Prime Minister on the promise of merging with Malaya, as in his mind, it was the only way for Singapore to survive. Its economy was symbiotically linked with Malaya. It had no capacity to defend itself, and it needed help in controlling the violence and righting its economy. Therefore, merging with Malaya made sense. On September 16, 1963, this became a reality when the former colonies of Malaya, North Borneo, Sarawak, and Singapore merged to become the Federation of Malaysia. But there's a problem. The Malaysian elections resulted in a party coming to power that ruled on the promise of putting ethnic Malays first. This was a problem for Singapore, which at the time was 60% Chinese and deeply mixed ethnically. Massive violence broke out in the streets, and the PAP, against their promise, ran in the federal elections on the promise of a fair and multi-ethnic state. The ruling party saw Singapore as a threat to political, social, and economic stability. As such, a unanimous vote ejected Singapore from the nation, just 2 years after the merger. Against its wishes, Singapore was independent and alone to fend for itself. Lee Kuan Yew found himself in an impossible situation. How do you build a nation out of a population that has no national identity, let alone make it a prosperous state? How do you create jobs when you have no natural resources? How do you pull 70% of your population out of abject poverty, house and educate them, and set them on a course for a greater life? Independence also brought the departure of the British military, further damaging the economy and taking away even more jobs. The cards were stacked against Singapore, which now found itself south of a Malaysia that planned to starve it economically by stealing trade, and north of an expansionist Indonesia who possibly had aspirations of invading. Lee Kuan Yew knew the fate of his fragile nation was up to him, and he decided he was going to drag Singapore into modernity, even if that meant with an iron fist. The first thing to overcome was the social unrest, while at the same time working to cement the PAP's political power. Individual freedoms were curtailed, free speech was banned, political opponents were jailed without trial, and draconian punishments were carried out for rioting, violence, and drug use. This hardline authoritarian approach even included public canings for chewing gum, graffiti, and public drunkenness. Anyone that spoke out against the government was sued into bankruptcy. Religious extremists, Communist Chinese, Malays who wanted to reunite with Malaysia were all silenced or worse. Lee Kuan Yew's solution to the potentially explosive underlying ethnic and social tensions was authoritarian rule. However, as horrible as this was, it worked in curtailing violence and stabilizing the nation. In his mind, the population would not care about the diminishment of their freedoms if it meant he could provide them with economic prosperity and social peace. Free elections would continue in theory, however, they would be tampered with so much that the nation would become a one-party state under the PAP, whose rule still stands to this day. With the social and political situation stabilized, Lee would carry out a dramatic economic overhaul that would go on to enable a miracle. The most pressing economic problem to address was housing. Representing one of the largest slum populations on Earth, 70% of all Singaporeans lived in rough temporary structures with no plumbing. Lee instituted a controversial law allowing the government to buy land cheaply, to which row after row of affordable housing would be constructed. While initially inspired by the British welfare state, Lee did not want his people dependent on the state forever. As a way to give citizens a stake in the nation's prosperity, to increase upkeep of structures, and to build wealth, residents were heavily encouraged to buy their apartments at low rates. The way in which they could afford this was through another policy that forced a percentage of one's income to be saved, called the Central Provident Fund. Originally, the savings fund was for pensions. However, Lee modified it, allowing citizens to spend it on housing. Slowly, over time, the amount forced to be saved was increased to 25% of every paycheck, with another 25% being deposited by employers. This eventually made Singapore the nation with the highest ratio of savings to income earned. This savings policy, coupled with cheap rates for state-owned housing, proved to be a massive success. All citizens living in slums were housed, and most started to be able to own their own property. Today, 80% of all Singaporeans live in houses they own that were originally built by the state. This has allowed Singaporeans to largely avoid the extreme housing prices in other similar nations like Hong Kong. But building houses for the population would not nearly be enough if the economy did not have jobs for them to work at. With no resources, no real existing manufacturing, and neighbors reluctant to trade, Lee knew the only way to grow was by doing everything possible to attract foreign investment. Keeping in line with Singapore's historical roots, taxes and regulations were kept low. Companies were even given massive incentives like being completely exempt from taxes for 10 years. To keep wages competitive, Lee banned unions and actively encouraged businesses to fire all workers when faced with a strike. The government also started dumping money into infrastructure projects and creating sprawling modern industrial zones. Seeing as Singapore's domestic market was small, numerous policies were implemented to gear the economy toward exports. Mixed with Singapore's existing port, incredible geography, and business-friendly policies, simple, labor-intensive foreign businesses started pouring in. This was helped further by Mao Zedong's Cultural Revolution in China that scared investors away from Hong Kong and Taiwan. Within just 10 years, Singapore had practically zero unemployment, and the economy was growing at a monstrous 13% every year. Singapore would continue to implement hyper-capitalistic policies to increase investment by foreign companies, so much so that it is the second easiest nation to do business in. With an economy starting to become ever more reliant on government intervention, Lee also took drastic measures to cut out corruption. This included sentencing those suspected to death, as well as offering some of the highest wages in the world for government officials, helping to reduce the desire to engage in corruption in the first place. This worked, and today Singapore is one of the least corrupt nations on earth. This substantially increased the effectiveness of policy implementation, as well as increasing investor confidence, further boosting growth and cutting down on wasteful spending. But Lee did not want Singapore to always be focused on simple, cheap manufacturing. He knew the most valuable resource the nation had was its human capital. As such, he started creating technical schools, paid foreign companies to train workers, and created modern hospitals to keep the population healthy. This in turn brought in more specialized industry and thus higher wages, higher savings, and more budget for the government to reinvest in education. This created a positive feedback loop of productivity gains. By the 1980s, Singapore was now in the business of petrochemicals, pharmaceuticals, advanced computer components, shipbuilding, chemical manufacturing, and more. In fact, despite Singapore's lack of resources, it had become the world's third largest producer of refined petroleum. This is because it had once again become the regional hub of Southeast Asia, importing raw materials from its neighbors, processing and manufacturing them, and then shipping them across the planet. This status of regional hub was further facilitated by Singapore's rapidly growing financial sector, which strategically bridged the gap between American markets closing and European markets opening. This rise was also perfectly timed, as many Asian nations were undergoing tremendous growth, allowing Singapore to act as a logistical and financial hub through which foreign investment was distributed. This, mixed with pro-financial policies, allowed Singapore to become the fourth largest financial center in the world. But Singapore, coming from such humble beginnings, meant it did not have its own class of entrepreneurs. The lack of capital and technical know-how meant it was impossible for Singaporeans to build substantial companies of their own to compete on the world stage. Not wanting to be left out and to further facilitate growth, Lee organized a group of gifted civil servants and international businessmen to make efficient state-owned enterprises. This included Singapore Airlines, steel, iron, and chemical manufacturing, and many other capital-intensive enterprises. While state-owned companies are usually synonymous with inefficiency, in Singapore, their primary objective from the very beginning was to make a profit. Low corruption in government, Lee's willingness to shut down loss-making ventures, and the lack of unions, which kept costs low, meant these companies were wildly successful. By the 90s, the government began limited privatization of the most profitable, giving Singaporeans preferential rates for buying shares. These companies helped to diversify the economy as well as filling gaps in the market. The revenue generated was also placed in a sovereign wealth fund, which was then used to further funding for healthcare, infrastructure, and education. Today, Singapore is one of the richest, most advanced, and competitive economies in the world. It operates the second largest port, is the second easiest nation to do business in, and still attracts the third highest foreign direct investment. Its people have affordable housing, they have access to world-class healthcare, and their students test the highest in the world. Its government under Lee Kuan Yew was able to efficiently implement policies that relied not on ideology but on their utility to Singapore's long-term prosperity. But this has, of course, come at the cost of political and certain individual freedoms. While it's hard to agree with its authoritarian governance, it's hard to argue with its success. The consolidated power allowed Singapore to maximize its advantages while limiting its shortcomings. Singapore has always been lucky with its location on one of, if not the most important global shipping lane. It got lucky with riding the growth of globalization in the second half of the 20th century. But most importantly, it got lucky that its dictator, Lee Kuan Yew, was smart and more or less benevolent in his actions. While it might be easy for those of us that live in Western countries to criticize some of Singapore's actions, our ideals and institutions have had hundreds of years to form, while developing nations are expected to do the same in less than a generation. The path Singapore took should not be and likely can't be replicated by other nations. Singapore's economy is not perfect for the world. It's perfect for Singapore.
watching Persistence Works Television Network, PWTN.
Hello, welcome back. Welcome back. Well, I'm sure you enjoyed this the videos we put together on Singapore. In case you are just joining us, you are watching Global Politics Focus on Singapore. You are watching Persistent Works TV Network. We are streaming on Roku, on Fire TV, on Apple TV. We are streaming on our two apps, our Android app, our iPhone app. We are streaming on our website as well, persistenceworks.tv. And we are also streaming on all the leading social media platforms, YouTube, on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, where Twitter is now X, LinkedIn, and everything in between. So wherever you're watching us from, I'm your host, Bishop Cornel Paul Vincent, and this Global Politics is a program we put together whereby we focus on nations and cities and states and talk about them, their challenges, their accomplishment, and we also talk with government officials, political leaders, and to explore what it is they are doing and maybe challenges. So today, our focus is we focus on Singapore, and I'm sure you did. If you watched the video we put together, I'm sure you were inspired. You loved what you see, especially the testimony of a nation going from a third world nation to a first world, going from being at the back of the line, moving to the front of the line. Only one thing made that possible: visionary leadership. That is why I'm emphasizing the fact that every nation, every state or city that wants to go far, that wants to reach high, that wants to accomplish much more than where they are today, listen, especially developing or third world countries, listen, to have a visionary leader is not an option. You must have a visionary leader. I'm not talking of politicians. You can have politicians all you want who will talk about winning an election and how to win the next one. And many of those, especially in those, we all know them, many of these African countries, including Nigeria, they break all the laws, they cheat, they do whatever they can to win election. And at the end of the day, their victory is not credible. Because at the end of the day, we all know that they cheat, they kill, they steal, they manipulate and do whatever, they buy votes just to win elections. So those are just politicians. But very few nations are blessed with leaders. And Singapore, I would say, is one of those countries that was blessed with not just a leader, but a visionary leader. Taking a country that was poor, has no natural resource, and was so disorganized, has a drug problem, and everything in between, rioting every time. Like I said, the leader is one of those that I reference in my book, Persistence Works, Discovering How to Persist Until Your Miracle. In this book, I chronicle 40 examples that persisted, of people who persisted to their miracle or to accomplish their dreams, their goals. And many of them are Bible characters, and many of them are contemporary characters. One of those is the Prime Minister of Singapore, who we just talked about, and the video emphasized, showcased much of what he accomplished. Lee Kuan Yew, he was the one that when the UN came, I reference this in the book, when the UN came he was trying to take a loan from the UN, from the World Bank, to kind of like help restart the economy, to fix things. And Dr. Albert Winsmos, he was an industrialist and economic advisor to the UN. He visited the country, and this was what he reported, quote, "It was bewildering. There was strikes about nothing. And there was a riot every other day. And everywhere, my first impression was anything but hopeful." This was an expert giving an expert, opinion of what his visit to Singapore was, to know if the UN and the World Bank was even to consider them. But at the end of the day, despite the fact that it was hopeless, he said it's nothing but hopeful. But a visionary leader will see hope where others see hopelessness. A visionary leader will see potential where others see nothing. A visionary leader will believe in his people, in his nation, in himself. And that was the case here. Of course, he did use some maybe extreme measures and maybe what some might call, maybe not too good, like human rights, some free speech where, he kind of did what he did to survive, because they were having strikes. And the British had given up on them. Malaysia had given up on them. Japanese, nobody was going to have them because they were more of a problem. Can you imagine a country that a fellow country kicked out of, say, you know what, we don't want to have you, get out here. go on your own. We don't want you because you are more of a liability. So I think he will need some extreme measure policies to really get things under control, which was what he did. He tried to do. But the bottom line is that the result speaks for itself. Nobody today will look at Singapore and question or say the leader what he did wasn't right, or whatever extreme measure he tried to use, that it didn't work, because today it speaks for itself. So I am challenging leaders of developing countries, third world countries, even including developed countries, because when you stop having a leader or leaders that are visionary, that are strong leaders, then you have no country, you have no nation. So it's a challenge for leaders, for countries, to seek to produce visionary leadership. And if you are a leader, if you're a politician in office already, it's a challenge for you to see beyond your personal profit, your personal interest, your personal investment, because most politicians see it as an investment and they want to recoup their investment. See your position in government, in power. See it beyond your own personal interest, your investment. Why don't you see what you can do to leave a legacy, so that 20, 30, 40 years from now, when they tell the story about your nation, about your city, about your state, the legacy you left as a leader, as a political leader, or as a governor, as a president, as a congressman, as a mayor, will be the legacy will be there for all to see. And even if there were some imperfections and things that you didn't do right, history will be kind to judge you and will forgive, because the result of the legacy you left speaks for itself. And that's my challenge to all leaders, African leaders, leaders in Nigeria, leaders in Ghana, leaders in most developing countries, especially where there have been so much backwardness, because the leaders have not had the political will to do what needs to be done to move the country forward. It's always about corruption. You see, one of the ways he fought corruption, this may be some may think this is extreme, but it worked. In fighting corruption, he instituted a death sentence. If you're a corrupt government official and you are convicted, you will be executed. Simple. And you know what? He also increased and made sure that they were well paid. So public officers in Singapore is one of the highest paid in the world. And so if you are there and you are being well paid and you want to enrich yourself by corrupt means, when you are arrested and prosecuted, death sentence. Why you may think that is extreme, but listen, Singapore is one of the least corrupt countries in the world. It didn't happen by accident. He put in place policies, sometimes extreme measure policies, that I think some nations that are so corrupt, I think they need to begin to put in place some policies, extreme policies, to really jail people who are corrupt, who are found guilty, not by trumping up things that does not exist because they are political opponents. No, I mean who legitimately were corrupt and were convicted by a court of competent jurisdiction, and they were found guilty, and there are proof of their corruption, at least to jail them for a long time to come as a deterrent. But a situation where the corrupt leaders, they do their thing and get away and actually come and run for office and win elections, then you are celebrating corruption. There is no way you can do away with corruption. Unfortunately, a country like Nigeria, that is the reality. I'm saying that because I'm from there. I follow the news and I know what's happening. Corruption is like glorified. Yeah, there is a on the surface talk about fighting corruption, but from the president down, corruption runs in the system. They all got into office, most of them anyway, got into office by corrupt means. So you cannot get into office by corrupt means and then expect to fight corruption. You lack the moral right to even do so. So this broadcast today, just like other broadcasts, is a clear call to political leaders, especially in developing countries and also in the developed countries, to become visionary leaders if you're already in power, or to seek to elect or bring people who are visionary leaders into power. That is the only way you can move your country from where you are. And it doesn't matter how bad the situation is. In your case, Singapore had it worse than most African countries today. They don't even have a natural resource, yet they moved from last to first. So I really want to thank God for that, for the testimony of Singapore. And that's also to say there are principles that we have to observe, and when we do, things will fall in place. Why those of us as Christians, as ministers, there are times when we overstretch the aspect of religion and our religious practice and make it think like it's everything. Because if you practice your religion and you break all the principles, all the laws that makes for great leadership or great nationhood, listen, you are still going nowhere, which is why in Nigeria, despite the huge Christian religious population, Christian and Muslims, there's still so much setback because they practice it on one hand. No, they don't. Of course, they practice the religious thing, and on the other hand, they break all the principles. They break all the laws that should make for great nationhood. So I really want to challenge leaders out there, political leaders, nations, developing nations, to look at the model or the example of Singapore. Let that challenge and inspire you, and let that become something that you dream to become like, to achieve, to accomplish, so that 25 years from now, 15 years from now, 10 years from now, 5 years from now, when we tell the story of your city, of your state, of your nation, it should be a different story. And you, as a political leader, should be one of those that history will be kind to remember, or to document that you were the one that made the change, the transition possible. Well, that's it for now. So thank you so much for joining us. This is a special edition, our global politics focus on Singapore. And if you did enjoy this, please let's know. You can send me an email and let's know how you enjoy this program. By the way, if you are a political leader in any nation of the world and you want us to talk about your nation, your city, your state, or if you want us to talk about your regime, what your administration is doing, or the challenges you face, or you are trying to like even get foreign investors and you want to come on our show to talk about it, hey, reach out to us. We are open for business, so to speak. We want to talk with political leaders, government officials, presidents, governors, senators, congressmen, mayors. We want to talk with you to talk about your challenges, your prospects, and the potential for investment, and also help showcase or highlight your whatever you are doing or whatever you have done as a people, as a nation, as a leader. So thank you so much for joining us today. So I want to remind you that this program, Global Politics, focus on whichever nation we focus on. It comes your way every Wednesday here on Persistent Works TV network. We stream on Roku, Fire TV, and Apple TV, which are the three largest connected TV here in the US. It reaches over 200 million potential viewers. We are on those platforms. We're also streaming on our Apple, on our Android and our Apple apps, iOS apps. So you can watch us on any of those apps, and also on our website, persistentworks.tv. We are looking forward to expand this year to be on direct to home satellite in Africa, in UK and other parts of the world. But people can watch us on different platforms, and we are thankful to that. We already have 15,000 downloads of our app. We are reaching to have 100,000 downloads this year, and we are trusting God will get there. So if you have not downloaded our app, please go ahead and go to the App Store, to the Google Play Store, type in Persistent Works TV Network. You will see our app, download it, watch it. We have rich content that will inspire you, that will bless you, So this program comes every Wednesday. Tomorrow on Thursdays, and every Thursday, we do have Persistent Works Moment, where we interview guests, talk about their secret of their success, and those who are ministers or who have worked with God, to learn how they have worked with God, what they've learned. So if you would like to be a guest on Persistent Works Moment, hey, we would like to have you to reach out to us, send us an email, send me a DM. Let's know. We would love to have you on our show, and we have a very competitive rate and very moderate rate to appear on our show, Persistent Works Moment. On Friday, we have our It's Your Birthday TV show, where we celebrate your birthday. And the side attraction is, number one, we will invite you to interview you on our TV platform, on our TV network, where we talk about your birthday. If you have product or services you want to talk about, you want to promote during that, we will do so for you. And we'll get American celebrities, some leading American celebrities, to sing and wish you happy birthday. So while that is happening, we have the rates are very, considerate, So if you want to celebrate your birthday, or your husband, your wife, your son, your daughter's birthday, reach out to us. Let's help celebrate your birthday. Glory to God. Then every day, Monday to Friday, we do have our Persistent Works online prayer. We talk about, we share the word of God. I teach the word, and also we spend time to pray. So if you are hungry for God, if you want to grow, develop your prayer life, if you are looking for a fire prayer, a prophetic prayer time, a time of prayer, intense prayer, where we connect with heaven, join us every day on Persistent Works online prayer. It streams 10 a.m. Mountain Time, 12 noon New York time, which is Eastern Standard Time. It streams 5 p.m. London, UK time, GMT, and 6 p.m. Nigerian time, West African time. So join me every day for Persistent Works online prayer. And finally, on Tuesdays, I do have my books, Persistent Works book series, where I talk about my books every week. So join me for each of these broadcasts, and we want to thank God for today. If you have a product or a service you want to promote, you want to advertise on our network, hey, reach out to us, because we reach a huge platform and we are able to bring you on to help tell your story. And if you are a preacher, you want to also be on Persistent Works TV network, maybe to have a 30-minute or 1 hour airtime to air your preaching, your ministrations, we welcome you also to be on our TV network. So we want to have you use our platform to spread the gospel. Well, thank you so much for your time. So don't go away. We have some announcement coming your way. And I want to thank you once again for spending time today on global politics as we focus on Singapore. I hope you have enjoyed the show. I'll be coming your way again tomorrow for Persistent Works Moment. And on this show, I'll be coming your way next week. Until then, I've been your host, Bishop Colonel Paul Vincent, and you have been watching Global Politics Focus on Singapore. So don't go away. Stay tuned as you receive this announcement. See you again soon.
We hope you've been blessed by today's TV broadcast. Join us again for our next TV broadcast. If you have a testimony of how you've been blessed, please let us know. Send us an email at persistenceworkstv@yahoo.com. Please support our TV network with your donation to help us reach the nations with the gospel. You can give through PayPal, Zelle, Cash App, or online at www.persistenceworks.tv. You can make your checks payable to Vincent Paul Ministries International at 11829 Gwen Evans Lane, El Paso, Texas 79936, USA. Attention, pastors and bishops. If you want to air your church or ministry program on Persistence Works TV network, or you want to promote your product or services, contact us today. Send us an email at persistenceworkstv@yahoo.com. Download our Persistence Works TV network app in the App Store or Google Play Store. Also, add us and watch us on Roku, Fire TV, and Apple TV. Read our Persistence Works magazine and enjoy great content. Simply visit the settings page of our Persistence Works TV network app. Click on the button to read the electronic edition of the magazine. To order the print ebook or audiobook editions of our Persistence Works book series, visit the settings page of our Persistence Works TV network app. Follow Bishop Colonel Paul Vincent across his social media platforms: Facebook, X, TikTok, Instagram, LinkedIn, YouTube, and Truth Social. For more information about PWTN, visit www.persistenceworks.tv.
Inspiration and motivation to reach your dreams in life? Are you trying to overcome discouragement? Do you desire a deeper spiritual walk with God? Do you question your destiny? Then the Persistence Works book series by the prolific author and international speaker Dr. Vincent N. Paul is written for you and is now available in paperback, audiobook, and ebook. Order today by calling 866-909-2665 or go online, persistenceworks.com.
If you need that salvation, if you need that forgiveness, you can receive it tonight. Shout hallelujah.
The anointing breaks the yoke. Hear Dr. Paul N. Vincent preach the anointed word of God that changes lives and brings salvation, healing, and deliverance. Invite him to minister in your church, conference, or crusade. Also read his life-changing books in the Persistent Works series. For more information about inviting Dr. Vincent to minister or to order his books, visit VincentPaulMinistriesInternational.com.
Dr. Paul N. Vincent, internationally known author and preacher, invites you to his annual Persistence Works Holy Land Tour in October and April. These memorable trips throughout Israel include include visiting historical sites in Jerusalem, Nazareth, and Bethlehem, as well as the Sea of Galilee, the Jordan River, and many more. Your travel package includes round-trip airfare from Houston, Texas, and Lagos, Nigeria to Tel Aviv, first-class hotels, 2 meals a day, air-conditioned buses, and Israeli Ministry of Tourism approved English-speaking guides. For more and to register, visit vincentpaultours.com today.
For more information about PWTN, visit www.persistenceworks.com.